by way of introduction, I would like to start off my presentation with a quote from a paper called An Address on the Relation of Physiology to Physics and Chemistry that was published at the beginning of the previous century by the famous British biologist G.H. Haldane. In this paper, Haldane basically presents a spirited defense of the organicist / anti-reductionist conception of life, and he ends the paper with the following words: that a meeting point between biology, and I suggest that for the purposes of our presentation, we switch this with life sciences, which include neuroscience and cognitive science. So the meeting point between biology and physical science may at some time be found. There is no reason for doubting. But we may confidently predict that if that meeting point is found and one of the two sciences is swallowed up, that one will not be biology or life sciences. Now, on the superficial reading of this particular quote, one might think, isn't this a bit unnecessarily daring, perhaps even naive, taking on physics, which is known to be the queen of sciences like that, especially given the fact that biology and life sciences in general have basically already started to adopt heavily the approaches, principles, and methods of physical science into themselves at this point. Well, I would say daring indeed it is. It has a bit of a David versus Goliath vibe to it, but naive, hardly. In the early 20th century, we all know that these were the beginnings of pretty turbulent times for physics, which ended in a full-blown crisis in the 20s and 30s. And in retrospect, of course, this all seems as if this was a natural development of the physical sciences, but back then it was way more murky, way more unsecure, way more obscure. And also during those times, mechanical or mechanicist approaches in biology had a lot of difficulties because there were a lot of alternative approaches around, approaches of organicist and vitalist bent. But not only was this particular statement not naive, in my opinion, but it was in fact quite prescient. Namely, what we can see happening in the past few decades, something that probably started already in the 60s and the 70s, but it is definitely clear, or becoming more and more clear now, is the unprecedented rise of life sciences. So it would seem that the wind has been taken out of the sails of particle physics, of cosmology and theoretical physics. There's been talk of a new crisis. There was a lot of talk about stagnancy, of sterility of work in those particular fields. No new, particularly interesting work has been done for the past couple of decades. Whereas in the life sciences, things are extremely, extremely vibrant. A lot of empirical and theoretical happening is going on, and there's been also a lot of social, cultural, and economic prestige related to that. And as we know, this is what makes or breaks a given discipline. And as I said in the introductory talk, there are many different poles of domination in cognitive science. Well, this holds true for natural sciences in general, and it would seem that this distribution of power is shifting on many different levels towards the natural sciences. Okay, but what could be this meeting point or meeting points, if there are more, about which Haldane speaks? And why is Haldane so confident that life sciences weren't going to be the one that will be swallowed, but that it will be the physics that will be swallowed, if any of the two gets swallowed? Well, the first and more obvious answer to this, so the meeting point that might be a challenge for physics or physicalist approaches, is the nature of life and organism. If in the second half of the 20th century, questions about life and organism, as Dan Nicholson in his studies so nicely portrays, were basically non-existent, they were treated almost as pseudo question, something that has been solved for good. As of late, concepts such as autonomy, organization, plasticity, rhythm, and so on and so forth have definitely helped to revitalize, pun intended, these questions. And we could say that there are analogous developments in mind sciences as well, with regards to mind itself and consciousness. And I've prepared a collage of different titles from various papers that kind of attest to this. We have a call for new biology for a new century, a welcome return of the organism, talk of the post-genomic era, and my all-time favorite, the organism is dead, long live the organism. So in a certain sense, and with a lot of qualifications and a lot of caution, we might say that we are witnessing, in a certain sense, a move from life being construed in suborganismic, that is to say, mechanistic terms, where life sciences are basically considered to be satellites of the physics in the grand scheme of things, towards the conception of life in organismic, that is to say, organismic terms, that is to say, in terms of self-organizing wholes. And here life sciences are conceived as autonomous. However, and this is basically the crucial point about my talk, I would argue that in addition to the question about nature of life and organisms, there is yet another meeting point, yet another challenge that is more far-reaching and more radical than the one that I've just presented. So the one about the nature of life and organism. And this other meeting point has to do with the implications that the introduction of autonomous living wholes has on our notions of knowledge, on science, on reality, and so on and so forth. So, in other words, the reason why the more physicalistically and or naturalistically minded thinkers might object to the introduction of, say, living wholes or different holist or organicist notions may not be so much related to the ideas of wholeness themselves, but to the fact that they threaten to open up a Pandora's box of unpleasant epistemological and metaphysical questions that many people would like to keep closed. So, and it is this meeting point, or at least a certain segment of it, that I would like to focus in this talk. And this is the meeting point that I refer to by the name of reflexive scientist.